Hi, my name is Brian and welcome to Yoga Hub Online Studio. This practice is going to be a relatively simple and accessible breathing practice to try and use our breathing to find a little bit of calm and a little bit of peace. It might be a nice exercise or a nice practice to use before bed or really any time you just need a little bit of chill. So for this practice, I'm going to recommend that you begin in a seated position. You can sit in whatever way is comfortable for you. You can sit in a chair, you could even be sitting on your couch if you wanted to. If you're sitting on the ground, you can sit cross-legged, or what I would recommend is something called supported hero's pose. So basically just means that you sit on your shins, but you place something between your legs. So a yoga bolster if you have it, but just a couple of pillows or even a block might work for you. Just basically having something that you can rest your hips onto. And I'd recommend that even if you were sitting cross-legged. But most important thing is just that you're comfortable. So you just find whatever seat is most comfortable for you. Hands can be where you want your hands to be. Your eyes can be open or closed. This is genuinely just personal preference. But I'm going to recommend that you take the first moment or two and just let yourself move around. Doesn't have to be anything specific, but a little bit of movement around your hips can be nice. A little bit of movement for your spine can be nice. A little bit of movement for your shoulders. A little bit of movement for your neck. Maybe a little bit of movement for your wrists. Doesn't have to be anything too specific, but just any little wiggles that help you settle in, you're going to let them happen. And for this practice, we're going to be focusing on a couple of breathing techniques. So I'm not going to be encouraging you towards any really specific movements, but that doesn't mean that this is a practice of stillness, because once you're breathing, you're never actually still. So any little wiggles, any little movements that feel nice over the course of this practice, you're going to let them happen. But when you do feel ready, let yourself settle into a little bit of steadiness. This doesn't have to mean perfect stillness, just maybe letting the bigger movements start to subside. And the first breathing technique we're going to explore here is something known as the physiological sigh. I'm going to give you just a small little background to why we're doing this technique, because sighing is this really interesting thing. We all tend to sigh several times an hour. And on a physical level, what happens when you sigh is you hyperinflate your lungs. You basically make your lungs a little bit bigger than they normally would be with a regular inhale. And this is a really important thing to keep our lungs healthy. But on an energetic level, sighing is often associated with a shifting of states. So if you've been busy working and then you stop working and you go to sit down just to relax, you'll often find that you reflexively sigh to sort of shift that, or to signify that shift from busyness to rest. It can also happen the other way around. So sighing can be a nice thing to tap into to consciously shift states. So what the physiological sigh is it's a double inhale. What that means is that we take a breath in through the nose. It doesn't have to be a crazy big breath, but just maybe a little bit longer than it normally would be. And towards the top of your inhale, you're going to pause. And then without exhalation, you're going to take an extra little sip of air in. So I sometimes like to think of this as like pouring a pint of Guinness. You got your first pour, you have a little pause, you let it settle, and then just have your little top up. So it might sound a little like... And then we open up the mouth to exhale. Now your exhales don't have to be loud. They definitely can be if you want them to be. For me, the most important thing is just that your exhales are long. But there is a nice thing you can integrate into this, which is something from Qigong known as the healing sound of the heart. So in Qigong, they have this practice where they associate different sounds with the major organs. The idea is that these sounds stimulate and clear energy with these organs. The sound they associate with the heart is ha. So it's H-A, but the emphasis is on the H. And to me, this just sounds exactly like a sigh. So you don't have to do it that way, But what you can think of is this HA, emphasis on the H when we're exhaling. So we're going to take roughly 5 of these. I'm going to guide you through the first few, but then I'll leave you to take a few at your own pace. So when you're ready, you're just taking that long inhale through the nose, pause near the top, and then take that extra little sip of air in, and then open up your mouth and exhale. End of the exhale, breath in through the nose. Pause near the top, have that extra little sip, and then open up your mouth and exhale. And I'm going to recommend that you take maybe 2 or 3 more of these just completely at your own pace. And then when you feel ready, you're going to start to let your breath travel a little bit more naturally, just in and out of your nose. And take a little moment and just tune in with how you feel. The basic idea behind breathwork as a practice is that there is this inherent link between breathing and feeling, meaning that when you're feeling a certain way, that tends to be reflected within how you're breathing. But then equally, you can be breathing a certain way, and that begins to influence how you're feeling. There's no right or wrong answers here, but it's not unusual after that little technique just to feel a little calmer, to feel like there's been this little sense of release. But just tuning in, this little link, breathing and feeling. The next technique that I'm going to encourage you to explore is something which in yoga is known as Chandra Badana Pranayama. And what it is single nostril breathing with the focus on the left nostril. So in yoga, there is this concept of the nadis. These are energy channels which energy flows through. And how energy flows through these channels has a big influence on how we're feeling. Now, there is thought to be 2 main energy channels, which is the Ida and the Pingala Nadi. Now, the Pingala Nadi is associated more with the right nostril and the right side of the body. And this energy channel is linked to the energy of the sun. So when energy is flowing mainly through this channel, it's thought to be kind of heating and sort of wakes us up a little bit more. And then you have the Ida Nadi, which is associated with the left nostril and the left side of the body. This energy channel is associated more so with the energy of the moon. So when energy is moving through this channel primarily, it's thought to be a little bit more cooling and calming. Now, interestingly, some modern studies have shown that our nostrils are linked with the 2 sides of our nervous system. Your right nostril is a little bit more linked with your sympathetic nervous system. And when that's active, we are a little bit more active ourselves. It's linked with our fight or flight. And then the left nostril is linked a little bit more with our parasympathetic nervous system. When this is active, we tend to be a little less active. It's linked a little bit more with our parasympathetic nervous system. So the idea here is by encouraging air to flow mainly through our left nostril, we're looking to stimulate this Ida Nadi, so this cooling energy channel, and also potentially our parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest. So different ways that you can explore this. What I recommend is you take your right hand and you bring the index finger and middle finger to rest roughly around the center of your forehead. What I like about this is it's just a little bit of tactile feedback to encourage the skin of your forehead to relax. You're then going to take your right thumb and very gently, you're going to close your right nostril. And through your left nostril, you're going to take a breath in. And then through your left nostril, exhale. Then breathing in through the left nostril and exhaling through the left nostril. And we're going to stay with this for the next few moments. If at any point your right arm starts to get a little bit tired, you can take your left hand and just rest it to your right elbow. Now, generally, we tend to have one nostril which is a little bit more congested than the other. This is something that's known as your nasal cycle, and it generally shifts roughly every 90 minutes or so. So it's not unusual that at this moment in time, your left nostril might feel a small little bit restricted. And obviously, if you need to grab like a little bit of tissue, give your nose a blow or anything like that, you work away. But sometimes when we find that one nostril is that little bit more restricted during a breathing technique like this, the temptation is to breathe more actively. So to try and almost force air through that restriction. What I would recommend is you actually take the opposite approach. And if you find that your left nostril is that little bit more restricted, well, in a way that feels comfortable for you, you can actually try and breathe a little bit more gently, almost as if you're trying to sneak the air through that restriction. And as long as it's comfortable to do so, we're going to stay with this for roughly another 2 minutes or so. One thing you may have found through our physiological sigh is that your inhales and your exhales were probably a little bit longer than they would regularly be. What I would recommend is, without feeling like you have to apply too much effort to this happening, as best you can, as you breathe through the left nostril, try to find a little bit of that length, where both your inhales and your exhales are maybe just that little bit longer than they regularly would be. And obviously feeling free to stay with this for a little bit longer if you like. Somewhere over the course of the next few moments, you might just start to release your right hand, let it go to where it needs to go, and start to allow your breath to travel a little bit more naturally through both sides of the nose. If you want to come back to a little bit of movement, you definitely feel free to do so. And again, just that little moment to tune in with how you're feeling. No right or wrong answers. You're just paying attention to your own experience. Our final little technique that we're going to explore here is a super simple one, but for me, an incredibly beneficial one. And if you want to stay seated, you definitely feel free to do so. For this technique, if you have the space to do so, you might also find it nice to lie down into whatever position feels most comfortable for you. So if you need a little moment to rearrange yourself, definitely feel free. But this final technique that we're going to go through is something which is known as triangle breathing. So what triangle breathing means is you're going to let your inhales and exhales just travel naturally through the nose. There doesn't need to be any big effort here. Your inhales and exhales, they don't need to be any particular length. But what I would recommend is if you imagine that you had a little feather underneath your nose, try to breathe so gently that feather barely moves. So not really worrying so much about breathing deeply, just in a way that feels comfortable for you, trying to breathe gently. But at the end of each exhale, if comfortable, you're going to let there be a pause. Now, I do want to emphasize that word pause and to kind of notice how I'm not using the word hold. Because I don't want you to feel like this pause needs to be any particular length. This pause can be super, super, super short. It could be a little bit longer if that was comfortable for you. But try to just think of letting there be a little bit of space at the end of each exhale. So just that little moment of pause before the inhale comes in. And so this is our triangle rhythm. Inhale, exhale, pause. And this rhythm is our natural breathing pattern when we are at rest. If you ever see like a dog or a cat sleeping soundly, you'll notice that this is how they breathe. Inhale, exhale, pause. And for me, this little pause at the end of the exhale, and again, just as that reminder, it doesn't need to be long, but it can serve as this little physical reminder of our ability to pause, of our ability to just slow down and almost take a little step back. And what can sometimes be useful is into that pause, mentally continue the process of exhalation. So that little sense of release we maybe explored in our sighing, try to let that release almost continue into this space at the end of the exhale. as you again just maybe stay with this rhythm a little bit longer. Just a moment to tune in to how it feels. Again, there's no right or wrong answers. You don't have to feel any particular way. And it's normal if you're newer to this, that this little pause might feel a small bit challenging. But with time and with practice, it does get a little bit easier. And what will hopefully begin to happen is this pause will start to feel a bit more restful. And that our breathing becomes something which just helps us find that little bit of calm, that little bit of peace. And what's nice about these techniques is that there's nothing crazy complicated about them, and that they're pretty much available for you to do anytime, anywhere. And it can be nice to be guided through these techniques, but the lovely thing about these breathing exercises is that we don't necessarily need a teacher or a guide to get the benefits from them. It's just knowing when it's going to be useful to turn to them. So if these did feel useful, just know that these are techniques that you can turn to anytime. You might just need to find that little bit of calm and that little bit of peace. So you feel free to stay with this for as long as you'd like to. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to join this practice. I hope you found it useful. I hope I see you again sometime soon.